Okay, so we're going to talk around the subject of hierarchy, particularly in Aikido, its strengths and weaknesses, what it offers us, what it doesn't, what we would do if we were starting from here. And if Paul Linden were here, he'd want to know what I meant by hierarchy. So I think it's always helpful to start with a dictionary definition, of which there are many dictionaries, of course, but coming from Cambridge, you have to use the Cambridge Dictionary. So hierarchy, I've got two definitions for you, maybe three. A system in which people or things are put at various levels or ranks according to their importance. Okay. We could define what importance means, but let's just stick with the definition. A system in which people within a company or organization are organized into levels according to the authority they have. Okay. Yeah, those two will do for the moment. Let me start with a question. Is it fair to say that generally speaking, Aikido is very hierarchical?
Yes.
Yes? Is there anyone who would dispute that as a statement?
I think it's important to note that there are individual dojos or dojos that are unaffiliated with some larger organization that may practice in a pretty non-hierarchical way. The basic process by which we receive rank is locked into a hierarchy that one imagines is kind of hard to disengage from.
Yeah.
But no, I mean there are more and less egalitarian dojo environments that I would say deserve mention in that context.
Yeah, and I don't want to bias the conversation by saying I probably am a good example of one, because I don't want to steer us in that direction. So I think that's a good question to start with, though, Rob. Does rank mean that you are better than anybody else to sort of maybe guide an organization, or even in all instances to provide wisdom and teaching?
Nope.
Say more, Molly.
Well, having come in contact with, hundreds of Aikidoists from, the Ano senseis on down kind of a thing, there's clearly people who gain higher rank have not a clue as to how to generously invite people to train. I've witnessed harshness and just, a variety of things that make me not want to train with certain people. I had the great fortune with my teacher, with Frank Duran, of having a conversation with him about, we're both on the same playing field. We are both on the same playing field. And yes, I have moved my feet 100,000 times this way and you haven't, but we are still on the same playing field. And so, yes, there is respect for his, 55, 60 years of training. But I never felt like it was held over my head, I'm tough stuff, I'm way better than you. I never got that through him, and yet I've still gone through the hierarchy, if you will, to fifth dan. So I've moved through that paradigm.
Yeah.
But definitely there are teachers that have got it going almost when they first step on the mat. There's a new student that'll step on the mat, and their generosity of heart and generosity of spirit and what they bring to it, to me, they are a fine teacher right there.
Right.
And then, like I say, there's some people that are that I don't want to train with, because there is that wielding that power in an unkind way. Not respect, but unkind.
Okay. So,
Quentin?
Liz, yes. I'll come to you, Sean, next. Go, Liz.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Because that directly feeds into sort of my thinking on this, is that when I look at what some people might call a hierarchy, I see levels of experience and responsibility. So the people who are more experienced are there to help and nurture and lead other people on the same path that they've taken. It's not the same to me as a traditional hierarchical authoritarian approach. And it should be backed up by mutual respect. And again, when we all bow in at the beginning of a session, the students bow to the teacher and the teacher bows to the students. And that to me is very symbolic, that it's entirely about mutual respect. And the students are showing their respect for the fact that somebody who's more experienced than them is prepared to give up their time to share their knowledge and experience. So that's how I see it. But I've just taken the previous speaker's point, absolutely, is that where I see it go wrong is when you get people who've got a very authoritarian or narcissistic mindset, who when they look at what they see instead is a status thing. And
yeah,
I
totally agree.
fundamentally disagree with them.
Okay, so Sean, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I agree very much with Molly and with Liz about the sort of more healthy expression of hierarchy as experience and as a sort of organizational principle to help sort of, you know, disseminate the teaching and share and sort of mutual respect is what makes it goes. To further disentangle this from rank, the story that I find really important here is a story by Andre Noke. Perhaps some of you know the details more than I do, but at one point Andre Noke called Sensei up because Hombu had sent a Shihan to basically take over his dojo from him, and Hombu's reason for this was that the person they were sending had higher rank. And so Andre Noke called up O-sensei and said, "What is the meaning of rank?" And O-sensei's reply, as I have heard it, was that rank has no meaning. The only thing that matters is your Dan rank in love.
Nice.
So insofar as we have hierarchy as a useful organizational principle, right? You know, someone's got to lead class, something like that, right? I think I agree that it should be really disentangled from this idea of rank, because even the founder said rank by itself means nothing.
Is it so Molly and Liz's statements that, you know, they've experienced people that maybe don't quite live the values that a lot of us, if not all of us, share on this call. Is that common experience? Is there anybody here who's not found that? Oh, that's a stony silence, isn't it? So I'm going to say every single one of you at some stage has come across somebody on the mat that you didn't particularly enjoy the experience. And I would say that that's certainly true for me personally. And I think it's your point you're making, Sean, especially given it comes from the source, is particularly valuable. But somehow rank has got intrinsically linked with authority. And that's the problem, how we disentangle authority. What is it giving you authority in? That's the thing.
Yeah. To be a little bit of a devil's advocate, as I kind of,
we always have to have those here.
Yeah, just to throw one more complicated element to it, right? A large part of this sort of hierarchy with larger organizations usually centers around, you know, like a particular teacher who, you know, may be a really wonderful practitioner and a wonderful teacher and a wonderful guide. I'm not taking anything away from any of that. But O-sensei also said that in Bu, there is no soke. Soke is a particular term which comes from this tradition of Japanese Budo, which usually refers to like the hereditary head of an art, right? So one interpretation of this statement is there is no hereditary head or leader for Bu in general, right? And yet we have heads of organizations, we have a doshu, right, a head of the art, right? Like, I'm not saying these are necessarily contradictory, but they're certainly in dialogue.
So would it be fair to say, if we interpreted that broadly, that what he was saying there is no one person had the whole answer, and that anybody else could have part of the answer, if not a good portion?
Yeah.
Because that's my feeling. We've got people on this call. I won't. But one of them comes from my dojo and is well into his 80s now, and I think it's fair to say he's had a bit more life experience than me. And I've always felt that okay, I might have practiced on the mat a bit longer than him, but he's practiced on the mat of life a bit longer than me, and so he brought his own wisdom to the mat. And that had to be respected and taken advantage of. And we've got Molly on this call who's been through some experiences, and Jeremy too, that I've never been through, and I hope I never will. But nevertheless, it's brought incredible wisdom to them both. And if I didn't take advantage of that, I'd just be a blooming idiot, really. So I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask you, is hierarchy a positive or negative word for you? Okay, so Dimitra, is hierarchy a positive or negative word for you?
May I say?
I think it can be both. I'm sorry, it is not only negative or positive.
Okay.
Initially, I mean, the first reaction could be negative, but if one thinks a little deeper, it can have positive.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. Steve, is it a positive or negative word for you?
What positive?
Hierarchy, is it positive or negative?
In my case, it's both.
Okay, Patrick?
Because
we'll have the discussion later. We're coming on to that.
Right.
I just want to get a sense from the room of whether your gut reaction is positive or negative. Patrick?
For me, both.
Wow, you lot are so good at doing Aikido. Gabby?
I think it's neutral. For me, the point is whether you misuse the power due to hierarchy. That's my point. Yeah. But hierarchy as itself, it's for me just a description of a system, and you have to ask whether you like or you do not like the system behind this hierarchy. But the word itself, it's for me totally neutral.
Joanna?
Literally, first of all, comes to me a negative connotation, but I can increase it to both sides, positive and negative.
We'll be doing that shortly. Vitaly, positive or negative?
It depends about how you treat that. If we speak about structure, it's fine. But I found one more meaning of this. It's from the most important to the least important. It's arrangement. Yes. When you come to that point, it's different. So it depends upon how you treat that meaning. I think it's also going to be both.
Okay. I hate that meaning because who determines who's important and who's not? But then I'm expressing my biases. Sean?
Yeah.
For the definitions of hierarchy that you have started us with, yep. I see it as a danger, but perhaps a useful one at times.
Okay. Derek, positive or negative?
Positive.
Positive.
A situation with no hierarchy is surely a communist situation, which I would not want to be part of.
Fair enough. Liz?
I'll let Alec go first.
Yeah,
Go
my
on.
turn.
I was going to ask him.
We're not being
to let you be
hierarchical.
his.
A hierarchy is perhaps a tool rather than something that's inherently good or bad. So it's nuanced. It's what you use the hierarchy for.
Okay. Positive or negative overall for you?
On gut feeling, tending to negative.
Okay, good. That's enough. That's all I wanted to hear at this point. Liz.
For me, rationally, I see it as being neutral, and it's something I think humans have sort of evolved to do, and sometimes we struggle. I think groups tend to naturally fall into hierarchical structures, and they can start to break down and stop functioning, as the previous person has said.
Yeah.
But my gut reaction is, on the whole, I think negative, because they open up too many opportunities for abuse.
Yeah. Okay. John.
To me, it's negative because I've just watched the full box set of I, Claudius, and I've seen what hierarchy is.
Brilliant.
Great show. Love that show.
Gordon, time to unmute.
My answer is yes.
That's right.
All answers are acceptable. You.
Me? I think it's very difficult actually, because hierarchy describes a structure, and the critical thing that we're talking about tonight in Aikido involves people. So there's an automatic definition that's crept in here that it's a top-down people process, which is not necessarily the case. But when it is, I think there is danger for weakness, so I'd be trend to the negative side.
Okay. Nico.
Both Lauren and myself vote negative.
Thank
I can
you
explain later.
Thank you for the Greek vote. Linda.
It depends, but on the whole, I'd say positive.
Okay. Jeremy.
Well, besides all the nuance to it, which a lot of people have touched on, my traditional knee-jerk reaction to it is definitely negative because of its mostly been misused in the world.
Yep. Okay. Molly.
Again, I've experienced both. So in the realm of a particular person, it's wonderful. In the realm of somebody else, it's
okay.
It's a power play that's harmful.
Got it. But is your gut reaction positive or negative? I know it can be positive and it can be negative.
No, it's negative. My initial is like, ah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie.
All right. So I hear hierarchical, and sorry, folks, I hear patriarchal. Which,
I'm guessing that's not good for you.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a few so I don't think I'm the only one. And so in that sense, negative from the point of view of structure and priority, and that's another story. But in terms of the way it's used and dominance and all, I would say I have a negative sense of it. There's some parts of the order it allows, but outside of that, I think it's been, as someone was saying, abused way too much.
Yeah.
Rife for abuse.
Rob.
Yeah.
Well, I'm of the school that your gut reaction is your limbic brain, and part of Aikido training is to get you beyond the simple dichotomies that your gut reaction sees the world in. There is power and legitimacy. It's like I get to say that my teacher's teacher, was so-and-so who, studied directly with O-sensei and is, and so there's a sense in which my legitimacy is empowered by the hierarchy we're here largely complaining about. But that is a very shallow view of what my legitimacy on the mat is, right? My authority on the mat, if it's say my mat, if I'm running a dojo eventually and it's my mat, my authority ought to be flowing from the people offering me the teacher role because I've proven to them that I deserve it. And my students who will be first well, they'll like all be fifth cues unless they train somewhere before, and eventually hopefully some Don rank students and whatever, they're not going to know a lot more than I tell them about the world.
Sure.
Unless I actively encourage them to go out to other people's seminars and stuff, which for the record, the teacher that I consider mine, as is Molly and Jeremy, and the teacher that Jamie started with, Frank Duran, Shihan, was really good about encouraging people to go get any flavor of Aikido they could get their hands on. My appreciation of his authority goes up because he does not guard it jealously at all.
Got it. Still, one word. Is it positive or negative for you?
It's a mixed bag we have to look at carefully.
Okay. Tiger, you've missed most of this, so just one word. Is the word hierarchy positive or negative for you? So you need to take yourself off mute. Frank.
Can you come again?
Hierarchy. Do you feel good about that word or not so good?
Sometimes I feel good, sometimes it's like 50-50.
Okay. Really interesting. So it's been quite a nuanced reply. Okay, so just hands up if you, by the way, my gut reaction is negative, just so it's declared. But I'm a rebel. I had a strong father and he's probably too strong. It makes me want to rebel now. So hands up if your feeling overall was negative.
If you're what?
If your feeling was more negative than positive. Okay. So those of you who've got your hands up now, we're going to argue what's the positive side of hierarchy? What are the benefits of it? Okay, hands up if you thought it was more good than bad. Because there were a few of those. Definitely more than two.
I understand the question.
Okay, and you did, Derek. So those who had their hands up, you're arguing for what are the negative sides of hierarchy. And if you said both, you can choose which one you want to join. So if you said both, how many hands up, please? Hands up, who said both?
Both.
Right, okay. Demetra and Patrick, hands up. Can you keep your hands up if you said both? Gordon?
Yeah, I'm both, yeah.
Gordon and Steve and Vitali, you're all arguing for the negative side, right? I think that's sides out. So, first person who said negative, sorry, I didn't take the names down. Again, can you put your hands up, please? Okay, let's start with you, Jeremy. Give me a positive side of hierarchy.
When compassionate, kind, loving people run an organization, it's a beautiful thing.
Okay, John. Oh, you're on mute at the moment, mate.
To give to his students every bit of knowledge he has.
Okay, so so is that really hierarchy, or is that just talking about a good teacher? So we can expand that and say when the organization genuinely cascades down everything it knows. Yeah. You happy with that? Yeah. Don't want to put words in your mouth?
Okay. I'll let you.
Thank you. Sean.
I think the positive side is that a hierarchy can provide clarity, and this can be very useful to get things done, and it can provide organization, a form of organization that makes it useful to get things done and provides a certain clarity.
Okay, Molly.
Wow. In the sense of having someone who has reached the, if you want to call it, there's a pinnacle. Again, if that person clearly has, trained a lot, but the compassion, the expression of invitation, and again, it's the invitation to train. So there's a flow of experience that I find beneficial in this idea of, oh, okay, I'm here, now I have all of these students and we're all flowing and we're all, so it's a huge continuum of a leader, not a somebody who's controlling, but is in a position of leadership, which draws everybody else to be in leadership as well. Again, that's been my experience.
Okay.
So
basically, when the person at the top not only is a great technician, because we're talking in Aikido terms, but also is aligned with the values, that can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So alignment of technique and values. Jamie?
Yes.
What do you think? Can you give me something positive about hierarchy?
Something positive about hierarchy?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's something to be said for the structure and order that it can impart to situations, especially in this. Yeah. But yeah. I was going to say something about traditions. There's something in the traditions that's beautiful. On the other hand, I don't think I can put that in the positive column, because if I look at like hierarchies in the Catholic Church or in tribes, I mean, it's. I'm reading an incredible book right now about elephants. It's a true story in Africa, and it's really interesting. This young male, the teenage male, in the hierarchy within that elephant tribe is excluded, completely excluded, and he's supposed to go off and find some other males, and they do their trip, but and it's just really painful, like even in the elephant tribe, in the hierarchy, and that's actually more of a matriarchy, but where this young male elephant is like, it's just painful, how on the outs he is. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of hierarchy, shall we say.
Yeah.
I think another word, because to introduce another phrase would be pecking order. And so I think that hierarchies have a lot of pecking orders, and there's a lot of peck that I don't appreciate a whole lot.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also, I should say one other thing. I don't think it really corresponds to reality. What I mean by that is, if at the top of the hierarchy, the king or whoever, or those at the top, or the highest rank, or the people running things, theoretically it's a meritocracy. I mean, the hierarchy is a meritocracy, so you merit being up there. But I just don't find that that's the case. Power often corrupts. People aren't necessarily up there because they're so superior to anybody else in any sense of the word, even just their talents. We find that we're finding right now, one of the things we're doing in the solstice seminars is to provide a lot of opportunities for people who aren't necessarily in that hierarchy place. And so they don't get opportunities. So now you give them opportunities. It's like, oh my God, there's so much talent, creativity, juice. It's amazing that we would never find, because the hierarchy gets in the way of that, providing those opportunities. And so, if I saw that hierarchy and meritocracy really had a correspondence, but I don't necessarily see that.
Okay. You didn't argue for the positive side, but all your points were well made.
I know. I was trying to, and the others kept butting in.
Provide structured order. I should have stopped you there.
I know.
Okay, is anybody else who said it was negative for them who would like to add something else?
Yeah.
Go for it, Joanna.
Sorry. I was thinking that some situations that I was really in this kind of hierarchy with like one of my senseis that he's much older, tons of years of Aikido, and then I just put myself in a surrender position that just like I got empty just to receive the knowledge without getting in any conflict. So it's just like just like living out the place where I'm here intriguing and arguing and stuff. So I'm just here, please, can you explain me this? I have no idea about this thing. Just like a really open space for learning. That's one good thing that I experienced.
So is your point that when you submit to the hierarchy and don't fight against it, it can be a powerful place of learning?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, it's a powerful place for listening and waiting for my body absorb, my brain absorb, then translate it to my body, then to movement. It's not just on the speaking. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? Another voice came up when I asked.
Hi, Quentin. The positive that comes to me is hierarchy can establish who's responsible. Who's responsible for safety on the mat? Who's responsible for the attitude on the mat? Who's responsible for the quality of the practice on the mat? That is a positive thing that hierarchy can bring.
Sure.
It identifies the person with whom the buck must stop.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Quentin.
Yeah.
Can I just going back to where you started with definitions? As I understand it, in Greek, hierarchy means the rule of a high priest,
okay,
which has its own implications. Well, you did mention the Greek vote just now. So, but also, I mean, so that's the people side of it. But hierarchy has a lot of importance in other walks of life, like computer sciences, for example. And I think it's quite helpful to draw lessons from that, because the implication there is there's a kind of codependence or interdependence between one node and another node, and that then leads to kind of a sense of mutual necessity. And if that element of mutual necessity can be brought into the human realm, then there's a little positive there, I think.
Yeah. So when you take the humanity out of it, when it kind of makes it everybody's codependent on everybody else, and that's very powerful. Yeah,
that's very powerful.
I agree.
But the other thing I'd like to just come back to later if there's time is just to add one more word into your discussion on hierarchy, and that is how it's implemented. And the cloak of hierarchy in Aikido, I think, is curriculum. And I think that's a very important subject to consider in the wider discussion of hierarchy.
Okay, well, if we have a suitable moment, by all means, pull me back to that if it seems appropriate. Nico, did you have a positive thing you want to say about hierarchy?
Yeah, kind of like I wanted to add to what Hugh said, because kind of like for me, the way that I would see hierarchy, again, if I take away the part of the domination that kind of like, you know, the word suggests, you know, at an educational environment, or, you know, a cohabitation kind of in terms of like systems, they're not really competing with each other, but kind of like they're feeding off for a common purpose. Then, you know, having somebody, for example, like a teacher or somebody who's enlightened, kind of like take perhaps be given the lead by common consent, that could actually, you know, providing clarity and consistency, you know, for whatever amount of time. We're not talking about like, you know, perhaps forever, but like, you know, as I said, like by common consent, that could be a positive thing.
Okay, so what's the essence of what you...
Can I say something?
Yes, you can, Laura.
I think some people would think that it's a way of preserving quality and the trustworthiness of the quality of what we're doing, if you see what I mean. So people will not think, oh, anyone can get a black belt, you know, you can buy it off the internet sort of thing. it's like that. It's, you know, people think that if you have a hierarchical structure and a very sort of clear, strict system for attaining rank, then it won't be easy for anyone to get that, so that you can trust that the people who do have it really deserve it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, perhaps a good example of that is if you're linked to the Aikikai and you're certificated through that. That in Aikido world is valued far more highly than if you're graded elsewhere. That's not as valid somehow. Anyone else want to add a positive, Demetra?
We got down to the negative ones yet.
No, we haven't yet. There are so many positives about hierarchy. Demetra, did you have a positive thing you wanted to say?
Well, I think I've experienced both sides, but I think that an important factor is that if it is imposed, if hierarchy is imposed or not imposed. Because during my training years, I've seen both. I've seen imposed hierarchy, which works in a very negative way for all. And I've seen hierarchy that is not at all imposed and it's mutually accepted as out of respect and justice, and everybody gets benefited out of that. For example, I've seen teachers who have never tried to impose any type of hierarchy on their students. And it's just that hierarchy, in a way, a very soft kind of hierarchy, is kept by itself without being imposed, out of mutual respect and knowing where everyone stands.
Okay, so what's your point? That hierarchy where there's respect is very powerful?
It's not imposed and it's mutually accepted.
I get that maybe has more benefit. I'm just trying to bring it down into a point, which is where it comes from natural respect rather than, as you say, imposition. It works to everybody's benefit. It's that sort of codependence, I think, that Hugh was talking about.
Right.
Okay. Well, now I get to say something now, Nick. I get to say my positive point.
Oh, just can I basically perhaps distill what Dimitra was saying, even you know, in 3 words. But you're talking about authority, but not authoritarianism.
Yeah. Okay.
I've been waiting for you to go on record, Quentin.
Yes. I was going to say that, you know, perhaps the main constituent of hierarchy in Aikido is rank. And whilst that's an incredibly political situation, for me personally, rank has been really helpful. I don't think my path up has been, well, it hasn't been by the Aikikai, and it hasn't always occurred in what I would say is the most meaningful manner. So I've been given grades and I thought, really, I'm not sure this is appropriate. But it definitely made me step up a league or two. It made me step up to the plate and grow. And it opened up my ability to talk to all sorts of people who never would have bothered to talk to me. And it's been a really, really helpful tool for me that's helped me grow. So that's been a real positive of having that hierarchical structure that's driven mainly by rank. I also accept that grading and ranking can have an incredibly negative effect. Just for me personally, it was a good thing. Okay, so I think we've covered the good points.
Could I say something?
You most certainly can, Derek.
You think of the hierarchy of a family. Now, we do hear of evil fathers who beat up their wives and children, but in the normal situation, the father he's not always the expert. He often defer to his wife, maybe more than 50% of the time. But it's a team. You need a hierarchy.
Sure.
You mean you can't have everybody arguing about which way to go when you lost. You've got to have somebody who says, well, I believe, I don't actually know, but I think it's this way, and if everybody said no, I'd be so, you know.
No, you're totally right.
You're prepared to take advice, and you're going to take advice, but it's your responsibility to be the father.
Yeah, you can't have a 2-year-old telling a 40-year-old what to do.
No, they might try, though.
But to tell a tale, so my dad was very authoritarian. I loved him to pieces, but he was a very strong character. And definitely his word, at least on the front line, was what happened. I think my mum was much more powerful behind the scenes than we knew, but on the front line, if Dad said, that's what happened. In my own, so the kids never got a voice, just didn't have a voice. In my household, I learned quite early on that I had a very, very bright son, and if he said something that was contrary to me, so annoyingly, he was more often right than wrong. So I learned to defer to, if Ben spoke up, Ben was usually right. And I learned to respect that and to give them both the space to speak up, and to learn that even though I was the dad and I was going to control the situation most of the time, that there were times where I had to defer. And of course, as they get more adult, the more areas they are where they have wisdom that I just don't have. So, the hierarchy changes over time, I think.
Oh, Quentin, now just say that our daughter is exactly like that. She's very bright and she puts a spotlight on, and from the time she was like 3 years old, I was saying to her, my goodness, you could grow up to be a lawyer, because she could instantly spot all of your assumptions and prejudices and have them all out in the open. But yes, and very young person, but a surprisingly old head on her shoulders.
Yeah,
and I had a thought as well about when you mentioned rank.
Yeah.
And about how being accredited with ranks helps you get on with various aspects of Aikido. I've spotted a few times, it's only been a few times, where not having a rank has a negative effect. And it's when I've come across people who, for whatever reason, personal reasons or otherwise, they don't grade. They're on the mat for years, but they don't grade when they should. And a couple of those I've seen turn very competitive on the mat, because I think because they haven't had their experience validated by getting the grade, they tend to fall into the trap of having to prove something a lot.
Yeah, interesting. It does have strengths and weaknesses, definitely. Jamie, yes.
I don't know what your next question's going to be, but just want to toss something out that we might want to discuss. I was thinking about this when I was taking a shower this morning, and what came to me was we have the hierarchy, the patrilineal hierarchy of Aikido, sensei to his son, and what if there were daughters? Would that even happen? And then I thought, what if we imagined that women were in charge of Aikido? What if there was a woman doshu? What if there was women in charge of Hombu Dojo, in charge of Aikido? Doesn't mean that all the men wouldn't be teaching, but we have men shihan and all, but women are in charge. What would that be like? What if it was a women's hierarchy, or maybe it wouldn't be a hierarchy, maybe it would be something else, but just in charge of, because that's the thing, hierarchies are in charge of, they have the power. And what if the power was in women's hands in Aikido? We've done what we've been doing for ever many decades, right? Practically last century. What if that changed? Let's try it for 50 years, 20 years. What would happen?
Possible questions to answer. But all I would say is that you and I, and anybody who's in the stateside will know of many senior women teachers who have definitely shown how to lead a community very successfully. But I'm sure, actually, I haven't actually so much come across this, but I bet you can think of one or two who maybe didn't step up to the plate and be the example you would like them to be. And equally on the men's side, lots of bad examples, but good examples too. So I think there probably would be more kindness and compassion and less imposition of power, but I don't think it's, for me personally, I'd like everybody to get a bit better.
Well, I would say one thing, you know, with SOSA seminars, we, you know, we're having men involved and learn to teach more and all, but one of the things that, you know, it's just a committee of women, right? And senior women doing what we do. And one of the things that's being important is to create more opportunities that aren't necessarily, you know, through the hierarchy, and to address issues that haven't been being addressed that are very important. And they're very, I mean, I think the thing is, for me, it's about being really real world, really connected to real people, doing real things in whatever it is. And I think the hierarchy, unfortunately, our hierarchies tend to separate from the real people and the real needs and the real relevancy. So I think that's a direction that I see is important, and that women in leadership seem to take things in that direction.
Jamie,
and therefore end up meeting needs more.
The short answer to your question is coronavirus would have been busted and the dojos would have remained open.
Yeah, no, I think if you say that Aikido is about an off the mat practice as well as on it, then of course everybody who steps on the mat comes to the mat with some experience and wisdom in areas that, you know, that others won't have experienced. And when that sort of is understood and you've got that mutual respect, then you end up with the sort of hierarchy that Dimitri was talking about, where, you know, respect is given where respect is earned, is deserved, really, and everybody benefits from that, because hopefully the respect goes in both directions and all directions. That's what you really want at the end of the day.
I would like to get my word in.
You're welcome, Steve.
I started training in the mid-50s, and it was very different. The hierarchy, if you got a sensei, you were very lucky. If you didn't, you tend to have higher ranked students teach. And if you forget to call sensei, you got a real sorting out, which I at the time felt was unnecessary, and I still do. But as time had gone by, I think the main problem now isn't the hierarchy, it's the fact that grades are easier to get, especially higher level grades. You things like Shihans and whatever, and half of them are not the age to be a Shihan. So where does one draw the line? Where do you take the hierarchy to?
I'd make 2 points upon that, Steve. One is that the Aikido community is much, much bigger than it ever used to be. So of course there are many more.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's probably, if you go back to the origins, you know, those first students of Osensei, when they were sent out, they hadn't been training for so many years, and yet they were given, you know, very high rank. Because it was a way of giving them authority when they went off to the States or the UK or Germany,
that's right.
or wherever. So, you know, training for a really long time doesn't necessarily equate to rank. It had a purpose, which was authority.
Quentin,
yeah,
I can remember what Sensei Williams once said to us about this, which is that over the decades, teaching methods and systems have evolved and become much more effective. So decades and decades ago, the teacher would maybe get up on the mat and they would demonstrate something without being able to really have the narrative to really explain what was going on. And they demonstrate it once, and then you do your best to copy it, yeah? And that's a real struggle, and it takes years on end. But once you've actually developed the narrative where you can really explain to people what mind-body coordination is and how you get there, then people develop very, very much faster.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I didn't say that, Sensei Williams did. So, yeah.
But I agree with him then.
Yeah.
Experience both systems, and definitely I'm for one for using every possible means of passing the information on. Okay, so we did quite well on the positive side of hierarchy. So those who thought it was negative, speak up for the for those who thought it was positive. Speak to the negatives. Who wants to open up?
Well, I think it's negative because you, in many ways, the higher grade have to take the responsibility for the dojo and everything else that they're running. But I don't think that is happening. It's happening more in Aikido, but I don't think it's happening in other arts the same way. The other arts are more sporty based.
Okay. So
Aikido isn't, is it? It's
no,
and that's the
what's
way
that
it should
got
be.
to do with a positive for hierarchy? So we're swinging the negatives. Sorry, I keep forgetting. We're looking at the negatives of hierarchy. What's the negative point in that?
Well, the negative point is that what I was trying to get across earlier is that because you don't have a point to go to, say you want to learn and you can't communicate with the sensei because he's so high up, you're not going to get to talk to him. So you have to go via the senior student.
So are you saying that rank gets in the way?
Yes.
Okay, marvelous. Okay, someone else who said that hierarchy for them? John, yeah.
I just agree with Steve there. In the early days, I mean,
all right then.
I'm 52 years at it. I found that some senseis I trained under were absolutely fantastic at the art, but had terrible, terrible, terrible people skills. So that was a big negative. They just couldn't get it across.
So sometimes there's the dislocation between technique and teaching ability.
Yeah.
And yet that's reflected in hierarchy.
Yeah, Steve will agree with
me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else?
I do.
Who else was? Laura.
I think that hierarchies in Aikido, sometimes it can be like a pyramid marketing scheme where you've got this Aikido empire that's just a money extraction vehicle where each level is just extracting money out the level below and it's flowing up to the top, and there's no accountability about how that money is spent. It's, it can just be going into private hands. It can be a profit-making enterprise. And what Steve was saying is sometimes people block access to the higher ranks because they want to maintain their level in the pyramid. They don't want people going around them. So they stop people talking to the top sensei so that they can maintain their status within the system and continue to extract money from the people lower down.
So is that point that it can become corrupted by power and
money making?
Yeah, it can be
political.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to maintain the, being the top dog within an organization, kind of like, saying that, like, I speak with the Shihan, then, and, I have personal experience with that, then, it's terrible, really, because we're not really teachers. We're not really offering anything to the collective.
Just gatekeepers that are actually blocking entry.
Yeah.
Quentin, I don't know if you were there at the time, but I remember Sensei Williams who was our top teacher, taking very strong action on that. I remember him coming onto the mat at a summer school and delivering a huge broadside to any Dan grade who had prevented any Q grade or anyone in the organisation from speaking to him directly. And he said, very clear that anybody can speak to me at any time and you are not going to stop them. And I remember there were a lot of very embarrassed faces around the mat that day.
Good stuff. Anybody else speak to the negatives of hierarchy, but they voted positive? Linda.
Yeah, I had lots of good positive ideas, but one negative I came up with is that when seniority or rank confers a role on someone, like being a teacher, being a leader, that they aren't well suited for, or on the flip side, excludes someone from a role that they are particularly well suited for. You know, you might have a black belt teaching class who has no inclination toward teaching, and a brown belt who's really very skilled in doing something and conveying it, who is excluded from that role. And part of the problem is they can find themselves included or excluded, either because of simply seniority, time in their role, or because of recognition. So someone they may or may not have the rank to be a teacher, or the position to be a teacher, because as Laura just said about being the pyramid scheme, you know, they're being blocked. They aren't recognized as being able to achieve that rank.
So is your point that kind of the ranking system doesn't kind of take into account the whole person? So, you know, it might mean you're brilliant on the mat, but as you say, a lousy teacher. I mean, Osensi's calligraphy teacher, he recognized his 10th Dan, didn't he? He didn't do Aikido, but he still awarded him 10th Dan.
Exactly. It has to be contextual. So you even have some dojos where someone's the head teacher. They set the technical standards for, you know, life on the mat, and someone else might be sort of the manager.
Yeah.
You know, they run the business, they, you know, and those people can be completely different people. It can be contextual.
Yes.
And should be.
And so the point is that the ranking system isn't contextual. It just looks at one facet of a person on the whole. Not always, but on the whole.
Well, in theory, it shouldn't look at just one factor. It should look at the whole.
It should.
But you might have someone who's tremendously gifted.
I'm going to use the phrase all too often contextual. How about that?
Not often enough contextual.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, misses the whole person, if you like. Okay, anyone else got anything to say on the negative side of hierarchy?
I do.
Great.
So I've personally seen it and experienced it. Ego inflation, big time. You know, where they go from maybe middle and then all of a sudden they're put in a higher position and they get a big head. I've seen that a lot. Experience stuff is being on the mat and being shouted at by the top dog. Did not enjoy that at all. And then the other things I saw were sometimes I would see Shihan hurting students or at seminars. For example, the student would be slapping the mat, but they would ignore the slap. I saw that quite a bit. There's some other things I saw, but those are some good points right there.
No, really, really good points. Anybody else want to add anything?
I was going to say that there is a complication depending on, in some cases, national governments and rules and regulations. You're running a dojo, or your teaching is happening at your dojo, and you need to get insurance, and the insurance insists that, you know, the people be qualified, and qualification is not a matter. We don't quantify kind-heartedness very well as a people. We quantify, yes, this person took this test and was passed because here's the diploma, here's the certificate, here's, you know, and whether or not that came from Hombu, you know, renders a certain legitimacy to it. And just as a business operational detail, you know, to get insurance, you need to be whatever. Now, the general rule, as I've learned it, is that at third dan, you can be teaching a class under someone else's theoretical supervision who isn't necessarily, you know, in the room at the time. And at fourth dan, you can open your own dojo and don't really need to refer to anybody for authenticity at that point. But there are people whose, you know, I imagine all of us can look at at least one other person who, you know, has a very high ranking. I'm not really convinced that that rank is deserved. And there are some people who are lower ranks that clearly are more skilled or certainly more athletic than people who, I'm sure I don't move as well. I know I don't move as well as I may have once. I know there's things I understand better than I did before. And so if someone were looking at me, when I was a second Dan, and I was younger and stronger and fitter and all of those things, and they were looking at me now, and there are things that I understand that nobody not grabbing my wrist at the time would necessarily appreciate, because they're not going to, unless you're the one I'm actually, conducting the Aikido with, you're not going to know what I'm doing and whether I'm doing it well. And one certainly hopes, and I think it is true, that there are any number of things I do better now than I did when, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But it doesn't necessarily show to somebody, sitting at the edge of the mat. So I think that the Japanese standard insistence on, what matters is who your teacher is, what matters who their teacher was, is trying to circumvent traditional hierarchies of rank in a certain way, and that it's trying to personalize your legitimacy. And you trained in a dojo where it's, where this level, high quality, this high caliber teaching was available, assuming that you picked it up, you should be perfectly good. But if we look at, the top 10, uchideshi, the most famous, most highly revered, teachers, all of whom studied directly with O-sensei, and how different their teaching is. And for some of them, they may be extremely highly regarded for technical competence, but other people go, yeah, but they have an anger management problem, and their students get hurt. And others who may be really, much more colorful or more creative or more, much more sort of dance Kido looking, but in fact, it's all martially valid. You just can't tell from a distance in the same way. And others who are, methodical. And, these are all different branches of Aikido. Yeah. And, where do you go with, who puts me or anyone else in a position to say, yes, this school of Aikido is the real school, my teacher, is the great teacher. And because we've heard lots of that over the years. And it's clearly a symptom of a framing of the situation that doesn't seem very healthy.
No, you're spot on. One person's black belt is another person's white belt. What I appreciate and what another person appreciates are two completely different things. Just depends on the path you want to travel, doesn't it, really? Okay, I'm going to give you all a magic. Nick, do you want to quickly say something?
Yeah, basically, kind of like we have to kind of like, when we're talking about hierarchy, so kind of like systems of governing, we also have to kind of like ground it into kind of our perhaps culture. If we try to imitate what the Japanese are doing, we're gonna be lost in translation. So when we're talking about hierarchies, we're not talking about like a feudal Japanese system, or maybe kind of like the transition from the Koryu, kind of like that have more integrity, for example, than kind of like 10 cues and 10 downgrades, because in the end everything is arbitrary. We just kind of even what Rob was saying, like in terms of the insurance, well, okay, you have to nominate somebody, and that somebody has to be, let's say, third dan. Somebody decided that this is a good idea, and then they get they got into it. So we cannot really kind of be hang ourselves up too much about kind of like what others were doing, and whether kind of like we can investigate whether it worked, and perhaps take the positive with us and see if we can assimilate it to our understanding and where we're trying to take the art in that respect.
It is a bit odd. Jamie, I'm going to just tell you what the next section is, and then you can decide whether it was helpful to come back before we go into that. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to put the world right here. Even within Aikido, we can't wave our magic wand and make it the perfect system we want it to be. But I'm going to give you the magic wand within this room to create the right structure for Aikido. So I'm looking, the last section will be, what should we be doing? What would be the most productive hierarchy, if hierarchy is involved, that would really take Aikido forward? Jamie, do you want to come in, or will you be able to express what you want to say within that?
No, I was going to say something else.
Feel free.
Well, I get. I'll bridge it in some way to help that conversation that you want to launch off. One of the things, I'm not sure what the answer is to that, so I'll be real interested to hear what everybody thinks. One thing that I would, in a magic wand world, a better structure, whatever that is, I think it'd be very important to number one, afford more opportunity to people, and number two, prevent abuse. And I think one of the things that we haven't done, and we haven't really talked about head on, is the amount of abuse that goes on. And sometimes physical abuse, a lot of times emotional abuse. And also, if you don't sort of just, bow and go, yeah, and keep your mouth shut and don't ask for this or don't do that or don't be, but you're okay, you stay safe. But if you try to speak up or you do something a little, that wasn't quite right, people get hurt. People are blocked from promotions. People are blocked from advancement. People are blocked from opportunities to teach or be included here and there. And that's a real problem. And it happens all the time. It happens in all kinds of organizations. Sometimes there's been sexual abuse, physical abuse, especially emotional abuse, and being blocked from further advancement. And I think we all lose out in the loss of creativity, the loss of input. So I want to say that because I think we really need to talk about that a whole lot more, address that. That's a real downfall in the hierarchy, and it exists. To bridge to your conversation would be, so what things do we want to not have and what do we want to build in?
No, really, really powerful points. Nico, quickly.
Actually, Laura.
Yeah. Following on from that, I think what we need to put in place then are policies and procedures. So we need a robust complaints procedure where somebody can complain about a dojo cho to somebody else. And particularly we need child welfare policies. Very, very important in this day and age that we need to protect the children, and we need to have welfare officers that are not necessarily the dojo cho, and they need to be trained, and they need to be DBS checked, which is the British criminal records check, and they need to understand that they have to escalate things, that they can't just defer to somebody because of rank or Aikido seniority. When it comes to abuse, and everyone's got the responsibility to disclose, and to make sure that that person is protected. So whether that means going to the police or some other method, that needs to be in place.
Sure. So in terms of waving our magic wand, maybe we can't change the Aikido world, but we can maybe make sure these things are happening in our own dojos. And I think your point, Laura, is that once we agree what would be what we would like to see within this new world, what do we need to do to ensure that it happens? It's then having those policies and procedures that protect the system that we're trying to create. I think that's a point well made. So, and I liked Jamie, what you did kick us off really well. We want to prevent abuse. We want to afford more opportunity. I think they're really powerful points. Who else wants to throw in something to this new world that we're building? Molly?
Yeah, I just, all of us have different entries into how we learn. I would never have chosen, I'm just going to be real clear here, Chiba Sensei to learn. Brutal, unkind, all those kinds of things, and yet he has a student body, had a student body around him that was the way they learned. They, whatever in their way of being, they chose that pathway of learning. Again, not a pathway I would ever choose. So how do you, it's like,
you can't prevent it, Molly, because we can't. But not equally, we can't stop people voting for Trump. I would like to have done, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think we're fairly like mine within this room. We can create the Aikido world that we would like, and we can cascade it out within our own communities. So I think rather than talking about how, people, you're right, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have chosen Chiba either, and it's not an example I would want to follow. What is the example I'd want to follow? What would the system offer that would make sure that it really brought the best out of us and most people?
Yeah. Compassionate teacher. Although, my teacher is not perfect, in general, the compassionate way of moving through the world kind of, spilled out over all of his students. There's hundreds all over. Move through in their Aikido and the way they teach with definitely a generosity of heart. They're not punishers. And certainly when I teach, that's the essence and the core of what I bring, both on the mat, but in the world in general. It's like, that's kind of my job, is to, I refer to myself as a love warrior. It's really my job in whatever it is I'm doing, whether I'm driving my car, interacting with somebody in the store, interacting with my family, interacting with the earth, if you will. Even how I cut flowers. It's a way of generosity of heart.
Well, I think you're a great example of that, and I'd feel safe in your dojo. So that's good news, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things I'd want to build in would be respect for the whole person, and understanding that whatever rank they are in Aikido terms, everybody has ability and wisdom that can be taken advantage of, and that it shouldn't, just because you go up a belt or two, you shouldn't lose sight of the fact that everybody has something to offer, and therefore you want to listen and practice with everybody.
We were all the same.
Yes.
So therefore, and at a dojo, we are one family.
Yeah, it has to be.
If we believe in peace for the world, then we have to be a family to help that happen.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it won't happen, because you'll always have that conflict.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing positive I can say about hierarchy, is that through the family status of hierarchy is the only possible way to achieve it.
Yeah.
I don't see any other way.
Okay.
Forward.
So, in good families, there's always love. So love brings forgiveness, and I think that's a powerful idea as well.
Yeah.
Quentin.
Liz.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Just one very quick thought. Where I think I've seen it start to go horribly wrong in the past is when people confuse sort of like rank in the dojo and in doing Aikido, and they take it off the mat with them, and they think that makes them a very, very important person in absolutely every other aspect of every other possible interaction. And that's when they become horribly arrogant.
Yes, well, that's what I meant about, respecting people, side up, down, and sideways. Just because you're good on the mat doesn't make you good at necessarily anything else. And I've seen so many examples of people who were high flyers on the mat, and the first time life came along and slapped them in the face, they were completely useless.
Yeah, and exactly. There's an aspect of Aikido which is fundamentally anti-hierarchical, which basically is, if you do it on the mat and it doesn't work, you're not doing it right. And if you do it in the world, whatever it is you do it in the world and it doesn't work, you're not doing it right. And that is fundamentally anti-hierarchical. Unfortunately, it's very hard to accept when you're doing things wrong. Sometimes
That's kind of why we practice on the mat.
Ego.
That should kind of be the purpose of training on the mat, to get used to the idea that you're going to crap it up more times than not.
And learn from the process of crapping it up.
Yeah, and translate that to life, that you're going to crap it up more often than not until you get a bit better at it.
I think a big point is, people train for different reasons, but one common one is empowerment, right? And personal growth and empowerment. And unfortunately, I think that the hierarchical system too often disempowers people, or it can disempower people, and it can also fail to empower people. And there's nothing that says that being a blue belt is less than being a shodan or the sensei. And I think we too often fail to empower people, and that goes along with younger instructors and all kinds of things. So I think as we're looking to the magic wand, the new world, it'd be how do we be sure that we really empower everybody, and empower students. And the very word student sort of sounds like less empowered, in the hierarchical system. And it really shouldn't be that way. Students are people, and whether they're kids or adults. And I think it's around, what are the ethics? What's the ethics that we're trying to promote, and the values. And so I would look to that more in terms of creating new structures or new weighted balances.
I think actually the idea that ethics would be brought to the heart of this new structure. These are the values that we espouse, and any behavior that doesn't live with those values actually gets stamped on. That would be a powerful thing. And the idea of empowerment, for me, the whole point of training somebody is to empower them to be the best version of themselves that they can be. So whether that translates to being a higher grade, so often people leave after, a year or two, a month or two, 10 years, whatever it is, but you leave them a better version and more empowered to be who they are. So
and people running around feeling nervous, are they doing it right? Are they staying in their place? Do they, and am I sure I'm doing this? And even if I don't necessarily agree with it, if I use my own critical intelligence, it's like, why am I doing this? But people, there's this ethic, you're just supposed to do this. And, to me, that's not an ethic that I particularly appreciate. I mean, I like to have respect and all of that, but I don't think that, having people kind of feeling like this and feeling constricted is empowering.
But we could spend a whole session on empowerment, because you're empowering those strong, aggressive people to be vulnerable. You're empowering those weak people who won't step forward to speak up and use their voice. That's both empowerment, to find their, a true and honest voice of what they really could be. Nico, did you have something to say?
Yeah, basically I wanted to add, because I fully agree what you said, Quentin. We have to be, to become a better person than we were. That's the most important thing. And if you are, for example, in any kind of authority position, not necessarily as a hierarchy, but kind of like just happen to have like more experience than somebody else, and there's consent. They give you their bodies, for example, or they give you kind of like their personalities, and you are trying to kind of like to build something from that, and maybe try to emulate something better. Then kind of like we could even perhaps like start looking at the way that we currently practice and the way that we are how to say, take customs from the Japanese and maybe kind of like updating them to what we believe it would be a structure that will help promote that perhaps like egalitarian approach. Like, for example, that the teacher is the first student above everyone else. So, you know, other than, for example, you know, one simple thing we could do is like maybe reduce the number of dans that we have. Maybe just go back into like, rather than having 20 different ranks, maybe have like 5 or 3. Or maybe even, you know, even simpler than that, rather than having to sit on a line and the teacher goes in front and kind of always kind of like, you know, creating this triangular kind of like almost like an imposition, but like, you know, you bow to him. Why not, for example, be on a circle? And therefore, like, you know, it's a mutual respect. Or even kind of like, even on Japanese Koryu, like the one I'm practicing at the moment, the teacher always sits in the line with everybody else. So you don't step forward just because kind of like, many Westerners have taken this as kind of like a tacit agreement of authority. And it could turn authoritarianism because kind of like, you know, we don't even understand why we do it. And kind of like, you know, how we could use the principles that the Japanese are having in order to use it for the betterment of society and ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's something that, like, you know, perhaps we need to look at a bit more carefully.
Yeah.
So little things that will kind of basically change the atmosphere in the dojo, but will kind of like basically empower the person to step on the mat because they feel safe to train with us.
Yeah.
That's it.
Making people feel safe sounds like a good point. Gabby, this is your first session here, so I'm wondering what you're making of all of this and if there's something you'd like to add. You just need to unmute yourself. I'm hoping you will. No? You're still muted. No, you're still muted. You need to take your mute off. It's going to happen, isn't it? Yes!
Sorry. Yes, I was not in the room the last 20 minutes due to an incoming call. So sorry, I can't answer your question right now. But I really appreciate this round and to get new ideas on the problem.
Okay. We've been going at this for 1 hour and 25 minutes now, guys, and I'm respectful of your time. That's a bit longer than we normally go. I'm happy to go on if you want to, but maybe we can continue this conversation by using the Aiki Extensions network that I've asked a number of you to join. So I think it would be good if you don't know what I'm talking about, then come to me, message me via Facebook or email me or whatever. I'll send you an invitation to join, and we can continue this conversation there. We talk about hierarchy and how we create the world that we'd like to see Aikido deliver. How does that sound?
Well, Quentin, that got us all talking.
It did. I think every single person in the room today offered something, and I'm really grateful for that. Fantastic. I do think it's helpful to air all of these things. We all know them, but sometimes we're not given permission to talk about them and to recognize them. And if you don't recognize things, you don't change them. So in our own small way, we've maybe made a difference in our own dojos, if nothing else. So thank you one and all again. Wonderful. Next week, we're going to look at how the way we've practiced during COVID, what we've learned from that. So there's been a lot of online training. There's been a lot of just your own stuff you do during the day, perhaps routines you've adopted that you weren't using before. What has all that taught you? We're going to explore that. What was the best thing? What are the worst?
Great topic.
Good. Well, then I look forward to seeing you all next week. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Twin. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, bye.